Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 14th of December 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Girish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
And what can we tell you? Well, the reports for weather are gloomy. Gloomy in Norfolk, maybe a little bit of sun breaking through. Murky in London, wet in Rhondda, wet in Plymouth. Pretty gloomy overall, and we like it that way. Can you cheer us up financially, Mike?
No, pretty gloomy there as well. So junk bonds. Junk bonds are, as many people know, high yield, so they pay a high interest rate. They're considered non-investment grade bonds, so they're high risk, allegedly. Well, we've got junk bonds prices collapsing at the moment. Largest drop since 2011 on Friday. The market's expecting similar this week. So to give an example, interest rates on what would be considered a middle class junk bond hitting 17.25%, going up. And what that means is that, of course, debt is impossible to refinance. And so over the last few weeks, there have been a number of defaults and bankruptcies among people that owe money through junk bonds. Mainly, we should say, oil and gas related organizations. So we'll look at that in a second. But as a result, what a shame. We've seen a $1.8 billion hedge fund, Third Avenue Capital. This was supposed to be a well-respected organization. They blew up on Thursday last week. And on Friday, Stone Lion Capital, they suspended redemptions on the junk bond market, so they blew up as well. They're a $2 billion hedge fund. The Wall Street Journal on Friday saying that what's going on, quotes, is a sign of how much the market for corporate debt is deteriorating. Investors have been dazzled that yields on bonds have climbed so high, even while default rates remain low. And currently, though, the ability to sell a large position is especially poor. So people left in the position of holding paper which is worthless. And you were just asking before the program, Brian, is an asset that you can't sell an asset?
Well, it seemed a reasonable question, Mike.
Well, it's the key question, I think, isn't it? So we're seeing a massive bubble bursting here. Now, underneath it all, of course, is the continuing collapse of commodity prices. But before we get onto that, we've got Forbes here asking the week ahead, how long will junk bonds and crude oil crush stocks? And of course, this is such a load of nonsense and lies, because the stock market is not being crushed by junk bonds and commodity markets. Here's the FTSE 100, for example, from 1985 to present. And as you can see, if we look here, really the FTSE has not done anything since the late 1990s. So what's going on there? Well, the fact is that the stock market is being crushed by financial speculation as a whole, and it has been since Margaret Thatcher unleashed the so-called Big Bang on us, and that basically removed any notion of separation between retail and investment banks in this country. And then, of course, in 1998, we had the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act in the United States, and that really was the final nail in the coffin. So both these events created the speculative casino that we have today, with its too big to fail culture, and that has had this effect on the stock market, where they just pull profits out. And of course, who's losing money? Whenever we see stock market collapses, it's mostly pension funds and investors, normal everyday individuals, not big speculators. So, as I say, it's the collapse in commodity prices that's behind all this. Here's gas falling to its lowest intraday level since 2002, according to Bloomberg, and of course oil. And people asking how far can it now fall? Now, there's many reasons for these collapses in prices. Geopolitics is playing a part, because everyone is pumping like crazy at the moment. So much so that there's nowhere left to store what's being pumped. Saudi's pumping in an effort to maintain market share despite the falling prices. Russia is pumping because of sanctions. Syria is pumping because our tamed terrorists, that's ISIS, are feeding off the oil that they're producing. And Iran is starting to pump because, of course, they've done this nuclear deal. And that allows them back into the oil market, so they're starting to pump as well. And so, as you can imagine, this is what's been happening as a result. This is the crude oil price since early October. Let's take a slightly longer term view. And what we've got here is oil below its post-financial crisis bottom. So everyone is pumping, no one needs it, and thus the price. So real economic output is at its lowest for years. Container ships being mothballed, demand for commodities has collapsed, and since oil drives it all, the price of that is collapsing the most. And on top of that, prices of real physical commodities as a whole, they host a whole host of funny money on top of all that in the form of junk bonds and derivatives contracts. So don't expect this latest crisis to end well. And if you're any doubt about where this leaves us as individuals, where we stand in the pecking order, then this story, probably not a surprise, but certainly warning enough. This is the case of a pensioner who committed suicide after losing all his savings in a government operation to salvage his collapsing bank. Well, the gentleman hung himself after 110,000 euros he had put aside during his lifetime evaporated as a result of a government bail-in of a bank. So he was holding a form of junk bond. These are bonds that you invest in the banks, and of course you become a creditor who essentially goes to the bottom of the queue whenever all other creditors get paid first. So he lost his lifetime savings, hung himself as a result. This is going to be the future for us all unless we do something about the banks.
Solve the banks and we solve the rest of the trouble, Mike, whether it's starving people or it's the wars.
Now, somebody in the chat box is saying no wonder petrol prices dropping. Of course, petrol prices aren't dropping half as quickly as they rose. So whenever the oil price goes up, you see the immediate increase in petrol prices. It's taking them quite a long time to take that back off again. So big profits still in petrol if you're an oil company.
Which is encouraging.
Oh, yes.
Credit where it's due. Well, what has the BBC been up to while all these very important things are happening? Certainly they're not doing any of the in-depth analysis which Mike has just given on the financial side. So let's have a look at what the BBC can do with its £3.65 billion budget. Well, we're promoting death. And I was particularly interested in this BBC article because it was being advertised alongside the BBC's very thin coverage on child abuse. But the story is that apparently so many people committing suicide in South Korea, that they're doing a special ceremony where their employers lock them inside or shut them inside a coffin. And once inside, they begin to realise life is actually quite good. And so they're in a better place when they come out. This seems to me to be unbelievably dark. I think we could have quite an interesting discussion. But this is what the BBC thinks our international news is about, Mike. It's
where is the death cult? I think the death cult is sitting in the BBC and in Parliament. It's certainly not in the Middle East, but anyway.
Certainly not in the Middle East, but maybe in this location. So a number of newspapers reporting over the weekend about Sheikh Arma, the man who was recently released from Guantanamo, the British man released from Guantanamo Bay. And according to the Telegraph, he said that there should be an amnesty for Tony Blair, so that we can all hear the truth about the war on terror. Now, I read some of the articles over the weekend, and I'd say to people, if you haven't read anything about this man, you need to, because what he is describing is utterly vile and horrific. His treatment while in the hands of course, both the British and the Americans. We're now led to believe that this man has said, oh, well, Tony Blair should be given immunity so that we can hear the truth. I think we need to ask the question, has this man been blackmailed, that we'll release you as long as what you say is the right thing and it's acceptable to the British government and British security services. There's got to be more to this, Mike. But what the man describes, and of course he describes being tortured while Blair was visiting military bases. We know that Jack Straw, Miliband, of course, have not told the truth about what's going on. So harsh reality of Britain is that we are now a nation which fully condones and supports torture, and yet we turn around and say, well, of course, Assad's got to go. Hypocrisy, unbelievable. Well, this was the part of the Daily Mail's take on the story. Guantanamo Briton Shaker relives his 14-year nightmare of savage abuse, including agony of being hog-tied for 45 minutes at a time. He's describing this in front of some of the journalists, but also adding that his arms were tied so that if he tried to relax on the floor, it apparently cut off the blood supply to his arms and produced even more excruciating pain. And how has this been allowed to happen? Well, of course, it's been allowed to happen by the lies and unlawful wars and torture that was going on under the hand of British Prime Minister Tony Blair. And of course, that is continuing, it would seem to me, under the hand of David Cameron.
Being accelerated, possibly?
Or accelerated. So if you've any doubts about where blame lies in this country, our view is that we should start really focusing on the British politicians who have been creating the unlawful wars, and as we're going to see in a few minutes, covering up the abuse of children. But what are they doing? Blaming other people as fast as possible, I think, Mike.
Yeah, now a few people may find what I'm about to say a little controversial, but we'll go through it and see whether we can avoid too much controversy here. But this article in the Mail, there are now 85 Islamic courts dispensing justice across the UK, according to the Mail article here. Well, I just wanted to suggest that we take a bit more of an objective look at this and see what is actually going on here. So we've got 85 Sharia courts. Of course, they're not courts, Brian. They are tribunals. They are arbitration, is a word that might be used. There's certainly nothing to do with the court service, nothing to do with the official courts. We'll come on to those in a second. So people go there. They choose to go there for what they perceive as justice. Just as we have with the Jewish community. These are the Beth Din courts, which have been running for many more years than Sharia courts, with no equivalent sort of outrage that the Mail seems to be expressing here. And of course, the Mail themselves published this article some time ago, pointing out that the Jewish community even have their own patrol cars, looking deliberately like police cars, without any public outrage, it seems. I thought it was illegal to represent yourself as the police, no? But anyway. But, you know, we also have other courts of arbitration going on in this country. This disgrace, this programme, is one such example. And let's not forget the court of public opinion, of course, which so many of those that are outraged by Sharia courts seem to love so much. None of the cases listed in the Daily Mail article, which the Mail says we should be shocked to the core as a result of, are any worse than the kind of thing we see on this disgraceful tribunal here that we seem to love so much. So, as I say, well, I'm just going to say I'm not defending what goes on in Sharia courts, but I think it's sheer hypocrisy for us to sit on our moral high ground, on our moral high horses, and criticise Sharia courts when we have children being stolen, as we're about to come on to, in ever greater numbers, property being stolen left, right and centre by our own so-called properly constituted, utterly corrupt courts, and when we have sections of British society behaving as they do on the Jeremy Kyle show. So I think this article is designed to do nothing other than create tension, outrage and indignation. And as I say, if we fall for it, I think we are a bit hypocritical.
Well, isn't it interesting, Mike, that this pops up a few days after we had the Butler Schloss report, which we exposed. What is this woman saying? She's saying, well, we want to downgrade Christianity in UK. We need to have a change to the Constitution because the Constitution doesn't really apply anymore. And when we look into where the funding is coming for this new opinion from Ms. Schloss and indeed former Judge Wolf, well, it's coming from the hand of George Soros. And thank you very much to the person who emailed me to say, have a look at the Daily Mail over the weekend, because Peter Hitchin picked up on this very subject. And although he didn't go into as much detail as the UK column had produced 2 days before. Nevertheless, he was highlighting the fact that something rather untoward was going on, in that we had billionaire international financier George Soros financing a study into whether Christianity should hold its place in UK. Why do I raise that so strongly now? Well, of course, if we follow through as to the origins of common law, we're going to come back to a biblical base, and we're going to come back to a Christian base. But Mike, I absolutely take your point, excuse me, that we are seeing people who are producing articles where, if you analyse what's going on, clearly designed to inflame the hate. And of course, the hate followed by violence brings in the Civil Contingencies Act, and that is the end of common law and indeed freedom in this country. So we are going to encourage people to start digging a lot deeper than simply succumbing to these articles, which are designed ultimately to incite violence.
Yeah. Okay, another reminder, competition ends on the 1st of January. Now, this is our last week of UK Column News before the Christmas break. We will finish on Friday, and then we'll be back on the 4th of January. So this is the last week of reminding people about this. Please do have a go and record a short podcast, anything up to 15 minutes. Certainly nothing longer than 15 minutes, please. Send it to us as an MP3 or something, or record it on your phone, whatever way you have to do it. If you feel strongly about something, and see if you can't win this microphone kit, software, microphone stand, case, and so on. Do give it a go. And just to say that unfortunately, Ian Crane had a reasonably significant road accident over the weekend. He has damaged his car beyond economic repair, and so he is not going to be able to join us tonight for Fracking Nightmare and the Crane Report.
He's fine.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, absolutely. And if you want to see the damage, have a look at Ian's Facebook page. He has posted a photograph. But anyway, we're going to try and do something tomorrow night for the Crane Report. We will make an announcement about that on tomorrow's UK Column News.
And just a reminder that Wednesday in the George is the UK Column social gathering. So if you're local to the Plymouth area and would like to come along for a chat, have a drink, and in a relaxed pre-Christmas environment, please do. That's the George, Plympton. Well, many people have picked up on what's been going on in the NHS over recent weeks, and in particular the Southern NHS Healthcare Trust, which is the one where a few thousand people have been dying. Seems to be a few problems, but not a lot of research into what's been going on. Well, have a look at this, and thank you very much to the person that sent this through to us. So it's from the Daily Echo, and the headline says it all: gagged, furious councillors refuse to be silenced over leaked NHS report. This is the Southern NHS Trust. And what's been going on? Well, essentially councillors have been gagged from speaking about the leaked report that accuses health chiefs of failing to investigate the deaths of more than 1,000 people. And Southampton City Council's press office sent out a blanket email to all 48 elected members, ordering them to remain silent in the aftermath of damning accusations against Southern Health NHS Foundation Trust. Now, this is particularly interesting, Mike, because once again we've got the media teams in the councils being used to interfere in the democratic process. So the press office threatening elected councillors. But it wasn't just the press offices, because I thought this was classic. This is reported in the article. Royston Smith, who's the Tory MP for Southampton Hitchin, said, "It isn't for the council to tell people if they can talk or not. People should be cautious, but in the end, if a councillor says something inaccurate, they will be held personally responsible." That's a veiled threat, isn't it, Mike? It seems to me it's a veiled threat. And what's the aim of this? Well, you don't want councillors talking out about people dying under questionable circumstances in the NHS. So this is David Cameron's team. You don't want the truth coming out about what's really happening in the NHS, even where it concerns the death of individuals. It's pretty despicable stuff. Well, let's go down the path, because that'll bring us on to social services. Guardian article, pretty classic here. Councils face losing control of failing children's services. Many people are going to read this thinking it's a good thing. But what's actually been going on? Well, this is the key to it. A report saying that there's been a huge rise in newborn babies subject to care proceedings. And the article says some 2018 newborn babies were involved in such cases. That's being taken at birth. That compares with 800 in 2008. A total of 13,248 babies taken into care between 2007 and 2014. These are snatched from mother at birth or shortly after. And then it says something interesting. Lead researcher Dr. Karen Broadhurst said that there had been a general trend towards taking more timely action. That's very nice language, isn't it? Where children could be at risk, but the number of newborns taken into care was disproportionately increasing. Well, as always, we thought we'd dig into this lady. Who is she, and how has she been selected by the BBC to comment? Well, let's have a look at it like this. Here's the lady herself. She's Dr. Karen Broadhurst. She's from Lancaster University. She's an expert on social services, but the bit highlighted on screen, which might be a little bit difficult to see, is actually saying that she's connected with a project which is actually funded by the Nuffield Trust. So let's bring that on screen. Here we are. This is Nuffield Foundation, and they are doing a series of studies, vulnerable birth mothers and recurrent care proceedings. Encourage as many people as possible to go and read this, because the detail, it is just like these are people sitting looking at laboratory rats. And highlighted in the centre of the screen there, it says that this is all part of a study for which they've put in some nearly £250,000, so big money coming in from the Nuffield Trust, in order to study what's going on with mothers, particularly those that are having babies taken away. Well, follow it through. This is part of a much bigger study into children and families, and this leads us to really say, who are these people and what gives them the right to be changing social policy? Well, this is the best thing to bring in, which is a little bit on who the patrons are. We've got Professor David Ryan, Lord Krebs, Mr. Moffat, Professor Moffat, etc. Let's have a look at some of these people, because it's quite stunning the power these individuals have got in forming policy by the back door. So here's Professor Rind. He's chair of the government's advisory panel on public sector information, chair of Portsmouth Hospitals NHS Trust, deputy chair of the UK Statistics Authority. That's pretty handy, isn't it, Mike? And we also note that he's previously held posts as director of the Court of the Bank of England, so presumably totally independent of the money system, and funding for NHS. And he's big on social research. Here's Lord Krebs. Lord Krebs is deputy chairman of the foundation, sits in the House of Lords, member of the Science and Technology Committee. And if you follow him through, well, what is he exactly? He was principal of Jesus College, chairman of the UK Food Standard, chief executive of the National Environment Research Council, a professor at Oxford. Who is this man?
Zoologist.
Zoologist. Zoologists looking at mothers and their babies. It's quite creepy, some of this. Well, here we are. Here's Professor Terry Moffat, Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at Duke University, North Carolina. So is she studying these mothers and their children? And note the longitudinal studies down there. This is where these individuals have sat following whole generations of families. Follows 1,100 British families with twins born in 1994 and 1995. I read that and I got a spooky feeling about stuff going on in Germany many years ago with a great interest in twins. Well, if that's not enough to get you interested, we've got Dame Colette Bow. So she's been chairman of the Banking Standards Review Council and AXA Deutschland and the UK Statistics Authority. So we've got a mix of big money and statistics, and these are the people commissioning studies into children. Or we've got Professor James Banks, University of Manchester, Institute of Fiscal Studies. Money, the underlying theme is money and statistics. And
but he's also into longitudinal studies.
Indeed, yeah. Long-term assessment of people. And this one really caught my eye because it's none other than Justice Ryder. So we've got a judge connected with the family division, presiding judge of the Northern Circuit, and this man is also working on studies to do with families. So when he's in court, which role do you think he's in? Do you think he's in his Nuffield professional study role, or is he making policy in the court?
So he's actually a member of the Family Procedure Rules Committee, so he's even setting the rules for what happens inside family courts.
Indeed, yeah. So we'll bring on the last one here, Professor Anna Vinolles, and she's a trustee, University of Cambridge, where are we? NHS Pay Review Body. That's the one that caught my eye. So we've got a nice mix here, Department of Business, Innovation and Skills and HM Treasury. All of these people have got a theme, Mike, which is to do with money, and they're all watching families, they're all watching the children. So we're going to ask, who are these people to decide on political policy affecting our personal and family lives? This is serious stuff. And of course, none of the mainstream press bringing it up. We just wanted to add a bit. So let's bring that little collection back on screen, because now let's have a look at the context of what David Cameron has been saying. He's saying that if there's any failing in social services, special teams are going to be brought in. He says children's services support the most vulnerable children in our society. They are in our care. We, the state, are their parents, and we're failing them. It's our duty to put this right, to say poorly performing local authorities improve. We will not stand by. And then he says that this is a landmark decision. It's transformative, as we did with education. So very interesting, particularly against the background of this story, that basically children being abused or were being abused in Queen Victoria School, where the teacher at the time said that a group of very senior people, friends of QVS, who may have included former Solicitor General Sir Nicholas Fairbairn and leading advocate Robert Henderson, high level, were taking the boys away to unknown locations, but they had to take their kilts with them. This was all covered up, and it seems to me there's a scam going on here. You encourage the paedophilia, you protect the abusers, you create the breakdown, and then you bring in the state to take even more children. My imagination, do you think?
No.
Well, let's put it in context once again, because here's Peter Wanless from NSPCC. Remember, NSPCC not being investigated because they're working alongside the Met Police on the subject of child abuse and alongside the Goddard inquiry. Here's David Cameron. We're just stressing his comments. This will be one of the big landmark reforms of this Parliament, as transformative as we did in education. Together, we will make sure that not a single child is left behind. And I'm going to say, I'm not sure I feel very safe with these particular people protecting our children. To me, Mike, we've covered money, vitally important, because of course money funds the organisations that are getting in close to the children. But if we don't protect the children, we don't have a future at all. And I'd like to encourage people to really think about this, the speed at which David Cameron is taking children. And of course, he's telling us that really it's the state that should be the parent. This is exactly the language being used by the named parent scheme in Scotland. Many people warning that named person scheme is already coming into England and Wales by the back door. Now, there's often been criticism of social services, but as we always say, credit where it's due. And thank you very much for the person who sent us this. It's an article from Community Care, the stealth privatisation of children's services. And what do they say? Well, in this article, they are saying it was just over a year since the coalition government allowed local councils to contract out their social work and decision-making for children in care. The response was overwhelming. 94% of 1,300 responses opposed the privatisation of these services. Then the government did something remarkable. It said, well, we've heard all the criticisms and we won't do it anymore. But what the article is really pointing out is within days, the government had issued a revised draft. It got little media coverage, and even now, as the article says, social workers and the public are largely unaware that private companies will be able to get contracts to provide child protection and other children's services. So, Mike, we haven't finished the Goddard inquiry. Well, that's
started the Goddard inquiry.
Well into the future. But what we're doing is we're giving more and more unaccountable people greater and greater access to children.
But this is incredible in a sense, because they say one thing, they do the other. This is exactly what they did with police funding, for example, where in the autumn statement they said we are not cutting funding to the police, while all the time they're cutting funding to the police. So they're doing the same here.
Just lies.
Yeah.
Well, let's bring the BBC back, because of course if you want lies and propaganda, what better place to go? Here's their headline: huge rise in newborn babies subject to healthcare proceedings. If you read the article, you'll see it's full of essentially the government line. But somebody pointed this out to us. There was a mention of Pause, a brand new organisation which has clearly come into being in line with the government's privatisation of childcare. Based up in London, here's the chief executive, Sophie Humphreys, and she's got an excellent track record from Hackney. So she's going to be going around helping to raise the standards in children's care social services around the country. We were just a little bit curious as to where the funding came from, so we gave them a call. This is the reply: we're not for profit, we're applying to become a charity so we can get alternative funding when the money runs out from the Department of Education. So this is a government set up charity. Accountable, I don't know who to, but that is now going to set the standards for money. And let's just remind ourselves here that this lady is also taking a lead on child abuse in Oxford. So presumably they'll be really getting to grips with the abuse at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. And indeed, when there was a massive cover-up between Thames Valley Police, Sarah Thornton, Sally Dicketts from Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, and the chief executive of the local council. Is this privatisation by the back door? Mm-hmm. I think it is. And why is it necessary? Well, just remind ourselves what Eileen Fairweather reported. I think this was a little over a year ago. She said the report that first exposed child abuse in North Wales care homes has finally been published, but damning details have still been left out. Well, in her article, she describes some of the just disgusting things that went on. 3 men tied a 15-year-old girl to a stick, half drowned her in a bath, obviously to force her into having sex. Managers claim the sex was consensual. This is the type of thing going on. And Ms. Fairweather says, I later exposed Mark Trotter, a Hackney social worker who died of AIDS after abusing boys in care. His counsel believed him an AIDS martyr and covered up his abuse. So here we've got Hackney at fault, but we've got somebody from Hackney being promoted to raise standards in the child health care. So it's a scam, Mike.
Yeah. Nothing else to be said about that.
Can't say any more, but if you've got children or grandchildren, your primary focus, we believe, should be on what is happening to children in this country, because that is our future. We'll leave you to think about that.
Yes. Okay. Well, the other big news of the weekend was the Tears of Joy, apparently historic, absolutely historic, COP21, COP out 21 perhaps. So the big deal has been done. The Mail crying tears of joy, apparently, because the world has been saved. And before the start of the conference, of course, President Hollande said that he was determined that any deal would be legally binding. An agreement is not legally binding. Sorry, an agreement which is not legally binding is no agreement at all, he said at the time. So the Mail decided that this agreement, which was announced on Saturday, must be legally binding. And well, they didn't put it in the headline. They didn't put it in the article. They put it in the image caption here, as you can see. The French foreign minister, pictured waving, revealed the historic legally binding agreement. Well, okay. The FT, before it was announced, the FT said that the deal will not be a legally binding treaty. So this is a bit strange. Who is right? Well, as the FT reports here, this was on Friday. John Kerry has said that the deal would contain measures which would drive a significant amount of investment towards a low-carbon global economy, but not legally binding. So what's the truth? Well, in fact, what we got was voluntary emission caps, voluntary progress reviews, no oversight on the voluntary progress and what voluntary progress was made, and voluntary contributions to a green climate fund. And these voluntary actions are encapsulated in a, quote, legally binding instrument. So all countries are legally bound to maybe do some stuff to reduce carbon emissions and pay into the Green Climate Fund on a voluntary basis, maybe at some point, if they feel like it.
So it's all pretty, what's the word?
Well, it's woolly, but it's legally binding, woolly.
It's voluntary, woolly, but legally binding.
Yeah.
Well, there you are.
Brilliant.
Okay. Well, happier things. We'd just like to say a very big thank you to all of you who've been sending us Christmas cards. Excellent Robin. Every time I get a card with Robin on, makes me think of the lady in Spain. That's a little in subject for the UK column. We've got a whole mix here. We've got some very nice religious ones. We've got some pussycats. We've got traditional snow scenes. We've got a very nice Tudor type wooden construction. And, well, this one simply won on the scale of how big. Thank you very much to all of you that sent them through. It does actually make a difference to us to know that people do appreciate what we're doing. So thank you very much for doing that. I'd just say, please don't send us any more, because we're having trouble to find surfaces to put them up at the moment. But thank you if you have sent us a card. And yeah, it's very nice. What else have we got to report, Mike? Nothing. Okay. Do think of Ian Crane. He's in a little bit of dire straits till he can get another car to get himself about. So if you're supporting Ian, he probably could do with a little bit of support from people at the moment. And of course, he's done such great work in exposing the whole of the fracking scam. But I would suspect, Mike, that the oil prices are not doing fracking too much good at the moment.
Well, this is the big question. Why is this agenda still going, even though it's completely uneconomic? This is a point that he keeps wanting to make. So anyway, we're going to try and do something with Ian tomorrow night over Skype. We'll announce that on the lunchtime news tomorrow. And if you're able to watch, please do.
Okay. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.